Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to episode 205 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. In the first show of 2025, I'll be flying solo to talk about Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Sunday will be the last day to ride the wildest ride in the wilderness at Walt Disney World until 2026, because the attraction is going down for a long and substantial refurbishment. I'll be talking about the changes to Frontierland, the history of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, the theming you may have missed while running through your theme park day, and the other versions of the ride throughout the world. This is my favorite ride at Walt Disney World, so I want to make sure that we are paying proper respect to it. Before we get started, we have a really exciting month ahead for all of you to start the new year. Next week, I will be talking to author Natalie Keller Reinert, who is releasing her newest novel, You Must Be This Tall, on Tuesday. Reinert is a former Disney cast member, and she has used that experience to create a fictional theme park to bring us into the world of the people who work there. This is a quick clip from that conversation.
I built this theme park and I shifted details of it as I was writing different drafts of the book, because I spent about 6 years working on this book in between other ones. And I based it on Cypress Gardens, the original, Freedom Land, USA, which was the park that C.V. Woods built in the Bronx after he left to Disneyland. Did not last very long, but that was the main sort of blueprint for America the Beautiful. And then I tried to, I looked at nostalgic parks like Six Gun Territory, I can't remember the name of it, in the Ozarks. And then there used to be one with a similar name in Ocala, Florida, back in like the 60s. So I am actually a big theme park history nerd, and I had a lot of this info at my disposal, and then I used it as an excuse to dig deeper into a lot of these historical parks and also into original Disney features. And by the end of it, I have a hand-drawn map for me, and it is kind of my dream to have a real theme park map drawn up of this place, and also the resorts and other parks that I have built into this world. It was such a pleasure. And it allowed me to do what I wanted to do with the book without having any legal issues or copyright issues. Like, it's not about Walt Disney World. Walt Disney World was a blueprint for this mogul who wanted to build his own park. So if there are similarities in some of the design, that's because he was copying Walt Disney. As simple as that.
That was Natalie Keller Reinert, author of You Must Be This Tall, which will be released to the public on Tuesday. She will be my guest on the podcast next week. On January 16th and 23rd, my good friend and co-host Maz will be back on the show to talk about our experiences at the Orlando Informer meetup last month at Universal Orlando Resort. We will wrap up January with another episode about former Disney chairman and CEO, Michael Eisner. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel to stay updated on new episodes, videos, and vlogs. This is going to be a big year for us, and we're going to be going way beyond theme parks in 2025 while continuing all the Disney and Universal talk that you love. Now, let's get into our conversation about the wildest ride in the wilderness. On October 1st of 1971, Magic Kingdom opened its doors, marking the official opening of Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. After the death of his brother Walt in 1966, Roy Disney worked tirelessly to make sure the Florida project wasn't a failure. In fact, Roy worked so hard to bring his brother's vision to life that it may have cost him his own. Roy O. Disney passed away on December 20th of 1971, a little more than 2 months after welcoming guests to Walt Disney World. The Magic Kingdom had 19 attractions on that first day of operations. Some of the 19 are still there today, like Haunted Mansion, Jungle Cruise, It's a Small World, and Hall of Presidents. Other attractions are similar to the ones that opened with the park, but have changed in substantial ways, like Country Bear Jamboree, Dumbo's Flying Elephants, and Mad Hatter's Tea Party. The latter needed a covering because the teacup ride vehicles would constantly fill up with rainwater during the obligatory afternoon storms in Florida. Still, other rides have gone away forever, at least on the East Coast, like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, Snow White's Scary Adventure, and Mickey Mouse Revue. What may surprise our young listeners the most are the rides that did not open with the park on October 21st, 1971. My family started taking me to Walt Disney World when I was 5. This was just before the resort celebrated its 15th anniversary. Even at the time, it seemed ridiculous to have a Disney Castle Park without Pirates of the Caribbean, Space Mountain, or Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Looking back, the rides had only been open for 12, 10, and 5 years respectively. When I started going to WDW, Big Thunder Mountain was a newer ride than Star Wars Rise of the Resistance or Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway are to guests who are visiting the parks right now. Still, they all dominated their corners of the park and seemed like they had been there forever. They were, and are, timeless. Pirates of the Caribbean was a huge hit with Disneyland guests from the day it opened on March 18th of 1967. It was the last ride at Disneyland to have Walt Disney himself overseeing most of the production. Walt loved the idea of having a Caribbean-themed attraction on the West Coast. New Orleans Square as a land made sense to Walt Disney for Disneyland. The real New Orleans was on the other side of the country. Nobody from Anaheim worried about pirates until the late 1990s when the band No Doubt was afraid fans were stealing their music off of Napster. Pirate culture was way more prevalent in Florida. Just 80 miles from Walt Disney World, Tampa had been celebrating Gasparilla, which was a parade and party paying tribute to the rich history of pirates on Florida's Gulf Coast. New Orleans, relatively, wasn't that far away either. As far as Roy Disney was concerned, Florida didn't need its own version of Pirates of the Caribbean, so Imagineer Mark Davis was tasked with coming up with something for the East Coast that would replicate a Western experience. His concept art was brilliant. Big Thunder Mesa was going to contain multiple rides, including the Western River Expedition, which would have been a similar boat ride to Pirates of the Caribbean, but with a Western theme, and there was going to be a runaway mine car roller coaster as well. It will come as no surprise to anybody who's listened to this podcast, but Disney fans hate change. Guests to this new version of Disneyland, near a city most of them had never heard of a decade earlier, Orlando, wanted to see their favorite attractions. They could visit the Haunted Mansion at Walt Disney World. The facade was changed to look like the Harry Packer Museum in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, to fit with the theming of Liberty Square. And there were some differences with the layout of the ride. But Disney fans who expected a Haunted Mansion ride got to experience a Haunted Mansion ride. In fact, anyone who had been to Disneyland could experience a lot of rides that had entertained them on the West Coast, like Snow White's Scary Adventure, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, Peter Pan's Flight, Jungle Cruise, and Dumbo's Flying Elephants. Many of these guests could be forgiven for expecting a Florida version of the technological marvel that was Pirates of the Caribbean. The sheer number of animatronics in Pirates, combined with the catchy song, made it an experience that people shared with friends and family after they returned from vacation. The demand forced Disney to make a decision, and they decided to crank out a smaller version of Pirates of the Caribbean to open in Adventureland in Magic Kingdom a little over 2 years after the park opened to guests. Now, the park had two major attractions right next to each other in Adventureland in Pirates and Jungle Cruise, and the entire right side of the park was looking empty. Less than 2 years after Pirates opened at Walt Disney World, Tomorrowland got its icon in Space Mountain. These changes in plans meant that the budget for an elaborate multi-ride pavilion based on the Old West was unrealistic. Western River Expedition may have been scrapped, but no good concept art will ever be completely abandoned. The parks are always evolving, and Walt never wanted Disneyland to be a museum. That meant that 20 years into operation, some attractions were starting to feel outdated and stagnant. Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland was a quaint attraction, but theme park guests were starting to look for more than quaint. Disneyland needed something with some thrills, and Imagineer Tony Baxter was ready to take the runaway mine car ride from Mark Davis's original concept art and turn it into its own attraction. This is how Disneyland, and not Magic Kingdom, was the first park to get a version of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Assuming that the Walt Disney World version of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad returns from the refurbishment without too much of a thematic change, there are currently 4 versions of the Wildest ride in the wilderness in Disney parks throughout the world. On September 2nd of 1979, theme park fans were introduced to the first version at Walt's original park. Replacing Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland, Disney Imagineers decided to pay tribute to the original attraction on this new Tony Baxter ride. Even the name, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, came from one of the waterfalls that guests would pass on the Mine Train. The facades on the buildings of the town of Rainbow Ridge that guests see on Big Thunder were actually part of the loading area for the old attraction, and Rainbow Caverns were another returning feature. With the ride being designed for a different park, some changes were made to the plans for the Disneyland version. This included reversing the ride tracks and softening the color of the rocks to blend in more appropriately with nearby Fantasyland. It's also the only version of Big Thunder to have guests loading the ride vehicles while outside. Many guests prefer the West Coast version of Big Thunder to its counterpart in Magic Kingdom in Florida. When asked for reasons, most answers actually date back to the refurbishment that took place in 2013 and 2014. The ride was given a smoother track, which is noticeable when compared to the rockier East Coast version. Special effects were also added to the third and final lift hill that simulate an explosion in the mines. I think it's safe to say that both of these changes were huge successes, and with the refurbishment coming to WDW's version, a smoother track and some 21st century projection effects would be a welcome change. As we move on to the Magic Kingdom version, this is the one that means the most to me because it's the one for which I have a great deal of nostalgia. It opened to the public a few weeks after I was born on November 15th of 1980. Loading from inside a building this time, the train starts off in a dark stretch and rises the first lift hill with beautiful caverns on your right. This version really shines, however, with the second lift hill. First of all, as you begin your ascent up the second lift hill, there is a small shack. Quickly look to your left and you'll see what appears to be a piece of welding equipment. There's a stamp on it that reads, "Made in Lancaster, Pennsylvania." I've always found this to be a particular point of pride because I was born and raised in Lancaster, but it's also historically accurate. Lancaster played a big part in the train manufacturing of the time, and many people still visit Strasburg Railroad in Lancaster County when they're on vacation to get a look into this era of American transportation. The second lift hill also provides the best views of the park, bar none. During the day, yes, Cinderella Castle and Space Mountain are certainly visible, and that's cool and everything. At night, however, this view just reaches the next level. My personal favorite is timing your ride on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad to be at the same time as the Happily Ever After Nighttime Spectacular. The fireworks are exploding all around you. While you climb that second lift hill, you're seeing some of the projections on Cinderella Castle and catching the fireworks as you're zipped in and out of the caves of the ride. It is just awesome. This is an attraction that is seemingly more intense at night, and usually it's almost a walk-on during Happily Ever After. Now, obvious caveat with that, is it is about to go down for a refurbishment, and people are trying to ride it one or two more times before they have to take a long gap. So that might increase wait times. And it is the holiday season. It will even be marathon weekend or preparing for marathon weekend when this does go down for refurbishment. So there's still going to be a lot of people there from now until the time it goes down. So maybe catching it during Happily Ever After isn't realistic right now. And of course, there's no way to know if that will change when it reopens next year. At Walt Disney World, Big Thunder is on the other side of the rivers of America from the version at Disneyland. So it has a little more land at its disposal, and it takes up about 25% more space. Big Thunder Mountain opened at Tokyo Disneyland on the 4th of July in 1987. For some reason, Tokyo dropped the railroad from the name of the attraction. This one is very similar to Big Thunder in Florida, but it has a few more sharp turns and a drop out of a tunnel. The only time a Disney theme park ever opened with a version of Big Thunder Mountain on day one was Disneyland Paris, then known as Euro Disney, on April 12th of 1992. Like Tokyo, Paris uses the three-word title for the attraction because the park was built with this ride in mind. Imagineering was able to make it a completely different experience. In the other parks, Big Thunder was shoehorned into a location with a set footprint. In Paris, there were no such limitations. Guests load the ride on the banks of the Rivers of the Far West, which is Paris's version of the Rivers of America. Instead of Tom Sawyer Island on the other side, however, the bulk of the Big Thunder ride is on that island. Immediately after getting into their trains, guests are dropped under the Rivers of the Far West, and the first lift hill actually takes them up from under the ground. This is an even better use of the stalactites and stalagmites of the caverns to the side of the vehicle. Riders are actually being lifted up through the caverns. The intensity level and the theming are both at completely different levels than any of the other three versions of the ride. And a 2015-2016 refurbishment added many of the newer features from Anaheim's Big Thunder, including the projection mapping effects. Disneyland Paris also has the only version of the Wildest ride in the wilderness with an on-ride photo, which I think everybody is hoping will be added to the Walt Disney World version during that refurbishment. Like many rides in Disney theme parks that aren't attached to a particular intellectual property, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad has a detailed backstory that would be lost on many casual observers. To make matters a little more awkward, there are 3 different versions of this backstory for the 4 different versions of the ride. That being said, they're similar enough that I can give you a quick overview of the theme. At some point in the 1800s, probably coinciding with the gold rush of 1849, gold was found on Big Thunder Mountain. As was often the case when gold was found or even rumored in the American Southwest, towns quickly sprung up around these discoveries. In real American history, a lot of men became extremely rich due to these boom towns. While a few made their fortune by finding actual gold, it was more likely that businessmen selling equipment, food, or renting shelter would be the ones who truly benefited from the gold rush. In the fictitious story of Big Thunder, corrupt mining company owners Barnabas T. Bullion in the US versions and Henry Ravenswood in Disneyland Paris built huge mining companies. They made money mining for a number of metals in the mountain, but unbeknownst to the average settlers, Big Thunder Mountain was a sacred spot for Native Americans and was cursed. Depending on the park, the desecration of this significant place caused a major natural disaster, whether it be an earthquake, tsunami, or flash flood. The disaster caused settlers to flee Big Thunder Mountain, but the trains were found racing around the mountain on their own with no people operating them. The railroad company was then founded in the old mining camp to allow people to ride the possessed vehicles. After the overwhelming success of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and the first attempt at a movie for Haunted Mansion, Disney looked to turn Big Thunder Mountain Railroad into a successful intellectual property of its own. Instead of taking it to the big screen, however, like they tried with Pirates and Haunted Mansion, ABC ordered a pilot of a show based on the attraction in January of 2013. While this television show never came to fruition, much of the theming in the queue to the Walt Disney World version of Big Thunder came from this planned story. There's even a portrait of the infamous Barnabas T. Bullion in the queue. The character looks an awful lot like Tony Baxter, the Disney Imagineer who originally brought Big Thunder Mountain to life. Starting in early 2015, the story of Big Thunder Mountain was explored again, but this time in print. Marvel Comics produced a 5-issue series based on the attraction. The story focuses on Barnabas T. Bullion's daughter Abigail, who joins with a group of bandits to undermine her father's authority. Abigail is a Billy the Kid or Robin Hood style figure who uses the resources she's able to confiscate from Barnabas's company to help the people living in Rainbow Ridge. It's unclear how much of that story was considered when a film adaptation of the ride was announced to be in development. Amber, Temple Moore, Finlayson, and Katie Elwood, who are known by the much simpler moniker of Bert and Bertie, were tapped to co-direct the project in August of 2022. I was not able to find too much more information on that project, which makes me doubt A, that anything will come of it before the completion of the Walt Disney World Big Thunder refurbishment next year, and B, that any part of the refurbishment at Walt Disney World's Big Thunder will have anything to do with the story from this proposed movie. Before I wrap up this episode, I did want to talk a little bit about the refurbishment and what I hope does and doesn't happen to the ride. This last part will just be me talking about Magic Kingdom specifically. I think the one thing we can be sure we're getting is a pathway that will go under, over, or through some parts of what is currently Big Thunder Mountain. Josh D'Amaro, chairman of experiences for Disney, has stated that there will be expansion beyond Big Thunder Mountain. This will likely mean that new lands will spring up on the other side of the Walt Disney World Railroad tracks from Big Thunder in the future. This expansion could even include parts of the recently announced Villains Land. We are pretty sure that Villains Land will be in the area behind Haunted Mansion and could stretch towards Big Thunder. Creating a pathway to the other side would be a huge step forward in taking advantage of the land they already have to expand to a very busy theme park. Knowing the popularity of all new things at Disney, having a variety of entrances to Villains Land would also be a way to control crowd flow when it opens to the public. Judging by the other versions throughout the world, I wouldn't be surprised to see the track get a much needed update to make it a smoother experience, and I expect the third lift hill to get some projection mapping effects to add to the most boring of the 3 lift hills that exist right now. It is my personal opinion that we will also get an on-ride photo, hopefully at the one quick drop between lift hills 2 and 3. The flash of the photo would even add to the feeling of chaos at night. Disney also wants to keep selling those Memory Maker packages, and adding another on-ride photo will only help in that pursuit. If you sell the photo pass to a family on their first trip, you're going to want them to find a ton of awesome photos for social media when they look at the app. That way, they won't hesitate to order the package again when they return for their next vacation. If they don't think they got their money's worth that first time, they probably won't revisit it the next time. This is a way to add to that photo pass package without having to pay a cast member to take those photos. Now, obviously, Disney loves to make money, and in recent years, Big Thunder has gotten a lot of fantastic merchandise. My personal favorite is the brown long-sleeve shirt that had the outline of the famous Big Thunder goat and the 4 letters GOAT at the top. Of course, goat could refer to the animal you see at the top of the second lift hill, or the fact that the ride is the, quote, greatest of all time. The Western aesthetic will always be popular. It is where we get the trend for blue jeans. Sedona red, rust brown, and dull yellows are all associated with the Southwest, and all are particularly popular right now. It makes me wonder if there might be an off-ride store added to the end of the ride. It doesn't feel like there's enough room for that right now, but we also don't know when the construction will start on Tom Sawyer Island and Rivers of America. Those two things take up a lot of space, and they are going to be leaving to make way for a Cars expansion to Frontierland. All of a sudden, you can spread out the exit area for Big Thunder and have an open-air store similar to the one when you get off of Pirates of the Caribbean. Remember, after the success of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, I am sure Disney was really happy that they had a store already sitting there to be stocked with IP-specific merchandise. If they ever expect to get this movie off the ground, it might be wise to be prepared for the possibility. That leads me to my biggest worry about this refurbishment. If Disney never follows through on the proposed Big Thunder movie in the same way they bailed on the ABC television show, will they end up sticking another intellectual property on this ride? Cars will be replacing Tom Sawyer Island and Rivers of America. The company has shown that integration is king when it comes to cross-promotion. I think the biggest concern would be making it some sort of Woody ride from Toy Story. Listen, I get it. Toy Story is popular, and Pixar seems committed to continue releasing Toy Story movies until the end of time. But there is too much representation of that property in Walt Disney World already. Plus, Woody is a goofy character who doesn't really fit with a darker themed ride like Big Thunder, especially if it turns out that Big Thunder is going to be an entranceway to a new Villains Land. I think you would be more likely to want to increase those darker themes at Big Thunder than to turn it into a glorified version of Slinky Dog Dash. It would be nice if Disney would just allow this ride to exist without a popular IP attached to it, and maybe they could even incorporate more of the Marvel Comics story into the queue. Spread the story on social media. Post quick mini episodes on Disney Plus. Release more comics, and give cast members working the attraction some backstory. A big portion of the Disney fan community would love to make it almost a scavenger hunt to find out more about this mountain. Making the story elusive would be like an elaborate hidden Mickey. As of right now, my plan is to join my friend Jillian on Saturday and see if we can ride Big Thunder Mountain Railroad an obscene number of times to get our fill before it goes down for over a year. I would love to put together the ultimate tribute vlog to my favorite attraction in Walt Disney World, riding it over and over and over while also taking the time to possibly visit Tom Sawyer Island and ride the Liberty Bell. This attraction just means so much to me as a Disney fan. To me, it signifies everything that Disney does well. If you want to have backstory, there's backstory. If you just want to ride a really well-engineered ride, you can do that. It's thrilling enough that almost everybody will be able to get their heart racing on it, but it also isn't so thrilling as to make it inaccessible for wide swaths of the fan base. There are no huge drops. You stay on solid ground the entire time. The views are beautiful. Honestly, I think it is the perfect step before advancing to something like Expedition Everest over at Disney's Animal Kingdom. This is another ride with great thrills, but thrills most people can handle. This has been episode 205 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty, the first episode of 2025. This is going to be a big year for us. Looking ahead, the top story is definitely going to be the opening of Universal's Epic Universe in May. Disney is going to be making some smaller but not insignificant changes all year. Even personally, I think there will be some new adventures on the horizon for my co-hosts, regular guests, and for me as well. I will continue to incorporate other types of travel into the channel because I have gotten a good response with some of those episodes. I know that people love my Disney history episodes, especially the series on former Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner. Don't worry, I also know that you love those tier lists, and we have some big-time tier lists coming in 2025. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel so that you don't miss anything. I will be back next Thursday when my guest will be author Natalie Keller-Reinert, author of the book You Must Be This Tall, about a fictional Disney-like theme park and the people who work there. Until then, have a great week.